Well, welcome to the third session of Forensic Accounting and Investigation Standards, which is understanding the FAIS. The first 2 days were great. So today, third day is also going to be great because we have one more very expert speaker with us, Naval Kishore Bajaj. So we have the anchor, the facilitator, and also one of the members of the expert study group, Satish Shenoy, and then also Naval Kishore Bajaj, who are there with us today. So today, as part of the third session, on behalf of Sama Audit Systems and Software Private Limited, I welcome both the expert speakers and all the participants who logged in both on Zoom as well as on YouTube. And uh, I have introduced Satish Sharma to you. Let me formally introduce Naval Kishore Bajaj. And then today, Naval is going to take up the 200 series of standards, the four standards on forensic accounting and investigation standard, the four standards under the 200 series. And he'll be moderated by, or you can say, facilitated by Satish also, so that, we can get the best out of Naval and Satish for the participants. So with that, let me just formally introduce Naval to you. Naval Kishore Bajaj is a chartered accountant, a certified internal auditor, a CISA, and a forensic accountant from ICAI. He's currently serving as a head corporate audit and assurance for Yokogawa India Limited. He's Bangalore based and is responsible to provide assurance to the board on internal audit, enterprise risk management, SOX and IFC for all operations in India, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. In his 15 years experience of working, he has worked with multiple industries such as industry automation, engineering, automobile, IT, telecom, FMCG, and foreign exchange. So that's a hell lot of experience across industries, from service sector to manufacturing. He's worked in multicultural environments with professionals hailing across India, Japan, Europe, Asia, and US, uh, which brings out a better person out of us, if we work across cultures. He is also a member of the expert group of ICI making and revising standards on internal auditing and standards on forensic accounting and investigation. In his personal capacity, he is also serving as the president of the Bangalore chapter of Bharatiya Vitt Salakar Samiti, which is BVSS, a leading think tank of finance professionals which advises government on various policy matters related to economy, corporate governance, taxation. So I think Naval is much more enlightened internal auditor because he is looking at diverse subjects. He has been a guest speaker on the topics related to economic policy and corporate governance in various reputed forums such as BVSS, Delhi Economic Think Tank, Infra and Real Estate CFO Association, Indian Society of Management Accountants, ICAI, IIA US, Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, PhD Chamber of Commerce, CAE Center, IBVA, etc. He has been sharing his knowledge in various educational institutions like MIT Business School, Department of Economic Studies in Central University of Karnataka, Jyoti Nivas Women College, Bangalore, and his analytical views on the budget have also been published in leading newspapers, which you keep reading on the CA inner circle. So I think uh, he is a speaker. He's devoting a lot of time and effort to the profession other than his job. So I think he's doing a lot of work for the profession at large. So I think with this, I would request Satish and Naval to take over. Satish, please.
Thank you, Divji, for the introduction of Naval. In fact, it was at my instance that I had requested Naval whether he can join us today for this particular presentation, because I felt that instead of just me, talking about the standards for continuous hours, 8 continuous hours, as in 2 hours in 4 days, I thought it would be better if we get different perspectives. And therefore, yesterday I had requested Anand, who had come in and presented the series 100 standards to us. And today I had requested Naval, who wholeheartedly, readily agreed to do so. This only helps us to get a better perspective. I'm here right through during the entire session for any clarification, enhancements, or any other aspects of the standard. I know Naval for now close to almost 3 years, but it looks like I've known him for 30 years. Uh, we met in one conference at Infosys in Bangalore, and I think we hit it straight away, we tuned ourselves very well. And I've also been the beneficiary of, participating both as a speaker and an attendee in the BVSS association, where he's the president and he's doing a fantastic job. Number of programs were held, including on the forensic accounting, ideation. It was more an ideation because it was, I think, about 4 months ago. So it was an ideation session, and he's doing a fantastic job there. And I'm happy to be associated with him on that forum as well. Besides this, of course, as Divji said, we've got many other forums where we kind of interact with each other, and I'm only the beneficiary so far as the association with him is concerned. Uh, of course, my association with Sama dates back to literally 30 years, and it doesn't feel like 3 years. It is 30 years and beyond. And so here we are, three of us, and Anand, if he can join later, probably he will. So let's start at the beginning, as they say. So before we have the pleasure of listening to Naval, I thought it's necessary for us to, like a serial, as I said yesterday, just to talk about what happened, what transpired very briefly in the last 2 days, and then set the context for our friend Naval to take it further from there. So Naval, as I said, we'll be talking about the 200 series. But before that, on day one, we had an excellent session by Anil Bandari, who spoke to us so many things about the futuristic views about what the FAIS, how the businesses are changing. And I think it was a very exciting session, 30 minutes, which went through, pretty absorbing and very futuristic in its content and delivery. Thereafter, I had given a background about how these standards really come about. So the FAIS, which is the Forensic Accounting and Investigation Standards, which we all will be calling it as FAIS, was conceived by by the DAB, that is the Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, which is a non-standing committee. Let's not get into those standing, non-standing committee, but which is a committee of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, which is the single largest body for accounting in India. And this is, I'm elaborating a bit because there are foreign participants as well in this webinar. The DAB had been given the task of really doing these standards. So the standards, as I said, have been so that there is a minimum standard which will apply to all the FAI engagements that we have. It's also such that the users will have an indication of the quality of the service expected, and the regulators and the government agencies, and we'll be talking about the government agencies in one of the standards today. The government and the regulators and the government agencies will have an appreciation of what they can expect from FAIS. And in general, it will be a guidance for matters of implementation and relatable practical issues. This may be the 10th time I'm saying the standards are principle based, which means that the standards will deal with the what and not with the how. For the how, we will be having implementation guides, the guidance notes, which are also in the pipeline of being made. I do agree that maybe it would have been better if the guidance notes and the implementation guides could have come out simultaneously. But be it where it may, at least the standards have been published. Not all of them. There are some in the pipeline. But so these are principle based. So they'll only be talking about the what and not the how. So for the how, we will be having separate documents which will come out at a later date. So the DAB made the DAB made a expert group, and then the expert group then went on to make various groups for actually drafting each standard. So it was not just a 112-page book written by one author and some 10 people gave expert advice on it and just corrected some commas and full stops or suggested some improvements or deleted some paragraphs. It has come from down up rather than top down. So each of the groups then went on to write the standards. There were a lot of mentoring, back and forth, a lot of meetings which we used to meet every single Monday of the week for about 2 hours. And there would be a lot of discussions on each of the words which were being used, as Anil Bandari also mentioned in his opening remarks. A lot of deliberations on the choice of words that have been used in the standards, including how they appear. And after that, the standards were then presented to the council by the DAB, and then the council went through it, gave their opinions, and finally it was there was an exposure draft which went on to to the public for exposure, and people and anybody at large could give opinions about each of the standards. They could have given they gave suggestions, improvements, and so on, which was again come back to the expert committee. The expert committee again went through, gave their suggestions, it went back to the DAB, and the DAB then went back to the council, and finally this got published in the first week of February 2021. The entire process started on 1st September 2020. So in a matter of 4 months and a week, this entire standards went through, which is, I think, a pace at which it went through was pretty phenomenal. And just a caveat that these standards do not apply to a situation where a professional performs forensic work steps as part of an assurance assignment, be it a statutory audit or an internal audit or any other attest functions. These standards have been largely bucketized into 5 parts. One is the 100 series, which we saw yesterday, standards on key concepts. The 200 series deals with the standards on engagement management. The 300 series, the 200 series is something what we are going to discuss today. It has 4 standards. And then the 300 series, which we'll discuss tomorrow, is on the standards on executing assignments, which we'll deal with tomorrow. And the 400 series is the series on standards on specialized areas, and thereafter on quality assurance. So in the forensic accounting, the basic thing is about discovery of evidence. We already spoke about this, the discovery of evidence, and to evaluate the manner of the evidence, to interpret and communicate findings suitable for a court of law. Point of emphasis here is that our reports is going to be used in the court of evidence, in the courts, and therefore this is going to be very significant that in the audit reports or in the forensic accounting reports that we issue, we have to be very careful about the choice of words, because at a later date, we will lose the opportunity, just as of course in an audit report as well. But here it is a little matter of emphasis because it's going to go to the court of law. And at that point in time, it will not be possible for us to say that this is what I wrote, but this is what I meant. So we have to be very careful about the reporting, for which there's a separate standard as well. So this will apply to all the members of the ICAI, because the CA Institute, the ICAI, has got jurisdiction only to issue instructions or only to issue guidelines, only to issue standards and make them mandatory only for its own members. However, the CA Institute and the powers to be are seized of this requirement and have been dealing with, on a continuous basis, has been dealing with other professional bodies and also the government to make sure that whenever standards are issued by the respective authorities, they will have the same flavor as these standards will have. Then there is the investigation, which is a systematic and critical examination of the transactions, of the facts, records, documentation for a very specific purpose. So the purpose has to be specified, as we saw yesterday in the terms of engagement. A fraud is an intentional or a deliberate act to deprive another of property or money through deception or unfair means. So that was somewhat an overall micro definition of a fraud. And a litigation is a process of handling or setting up or settling of disputes in the court or before any regulatory authority, including mediation. We also understood the basic principles, which talked about quality and continuous improvement, independence, integrity, and objectivity, how important it is to have independence and objectivity in actually carrying out this forensic work. Due professional care, the skills and competencies that are required to carry out FAIS, the primacy of truth, because the truth is the most important thing that comes out of a FAIS engagement. That is the primary purpose of why assignments are are actually done. The other important aspect of while we do this, another important principle while these FA engagements are done is to respect the rights and obligation of the suspect. Nobody can go overboard. There cannot be any intimidation. There cannot be any force of any kind applied. And the situation, even when there are interviews being conducted, it must be in a very cordial manner and must be done giving full respect and more of the rights and obligation of the suspect. And no judgment should ever be passed until both sides are heard. And fairness, as we said, must not only be given, but it also must be seen to be given. We must separate facts from opinions. That is another important principle, that facts are facts and opinions are opinions. Opinions come out of facts. There cannot be different opinions about facts. There can be only one version of the fact, whereas there can be different versions of opinions that one might have. But therefore, we must be in a position in a FAIS to make sure that the facts and opinions are appropriately segregated. And the confidentiality, I think, requires no it's so important that confidential, any information which comes to us as investigators need to be kept absolutely confidential and should be shared only if there is a specific authority or a law or a legal requirement to share the same. Otherwise, they need to be uh, you know uh, uh, kept very, very confidential. So yesterday, so that was day one. On day two, that is yesterday, Anand took us through the entire four standards under the 100 series. The first standard, just as a quick recap, and Naval, don't worry, I'm not going to get into too much of details. In the next 5 minutes, you'll be on the spotlight will be on you. So on FAIS 110, which was on the nature of engagement, we understood that the nature of engagement may include forensic accounting, investigation, litigation support, and this standard will apply to all engagement. And then we talked about knowing the accounting skills to discover evidence and apply investigation techniques and methods wherever required. A lot of emphasis was given on documentation and the reports, which is in line with the engagement. All initial documents, correspondence, minutes, etc., is part of the documentation process. Obviously, the standard laid down key concepts relating to the nature of the engagement, and the main objectives were for clarity on engagement and what it seeks, defines appropriate scope and approach, and identifies skills and resources that were required. The second part portion was a very important section, the standard 120, which is on fraud risk. That was to understand the fraud risk concepts and its application in fraudulent scenarios, and to help we professionals focus and prioritize on the work, our work on important areas. And obviously, the need was felt of doing a preliminary fraud risk assessment to understand the nature, complexity, and the skills which were required to do this. Prioritize identification of fraud indicators within the time constraints. And the objectives was that the fraud risk concepts are recognized and high risk and vulnerable areas are clearly identified and prioritized. And the documentation here again is to clearly explain our understanding of the fraud risk and its application, and summary of the fraud risk observed and its relevance in its uh, in the final report. FAIS 130 was on laws and regulations. That is to understand the laws and regulations and its applicability to the FAIS. And obviously, the appointment must be under some specific legislation or law, which will be done by the client or through some government agency through a written agreement. Uh, the documentation suggests that we must have checklists to make sure that all the applicable laws are properly encapsulated, and all the compliances is done perfectly with the absolute documentation of the chain of custody of evidences. And the main objectives was to make sure that we conduct as per the mandate under the relevant, we conduct the investigation as per the mandate under the relevant laws, and we have a process-driven approach to identify and report violation of laws and regulation. At this stage, I think I was just emphasize that in case if we are not able to comply with any of the standards, it is very much onerous on our part. It's not only onerous, it's a requirement that we clearly spell out why, under what circumstances we have not been able to maintain, to follow the standard, and give appropriate reasons, so that this does not become a point of deficiency of service or due, or we be accused later of not having due professional care. And the requirements of the FAIS 130, which is on laws and regulation, is to make sure that the objectives of the engagement are in line with the laws and regulation. And we as professionals will consider all the various laws and regulations which stipulate the manner of work, presentation of evidence, and or testimony. And if we implement a process-driven approach in identifying deviations and seek expert legal advice wherever required. Of course, there is a separate section on work of an expert, that is relying on the work of an expert, under what circumstances we actually seek legal advice. I mean, rely on the work of an expert. The last one, and this I think had a lot of discussion yesterday on applying the hypothesis, and to apply the hypothesis to is discovered to prove or disprove a particular assumption that is made. So a lot of questions around how to apply this hypothesis, what is hypothesis, when does this hypothesis required to be made? Is it required to be made before the start of the engagement? Is it required to be made during the engagement? Once having made, is it going to be cast in stone and we are not going to revise it? So a lot of discussions yesterday appropriately on this particular standard, but I think this was the crux of this was an important part of the discussion that we had today. So today we are on the 200 series, which is the standards on engagement practice, and we have there are of course 4 standards over here. One on engagement objectives, which that is 210, which is going to clearly set out the responsibilities and objectives of the various engagements. Naval will of course explain to us the requirements of what is the documentation required, what are the inclusions and exclusions in the scope, what is it that we need to ensure the expected outcomes, and what are the objectives of it, what is the primary purpose of the engagement, the scope consistent with the objectives, and what is the documentation, the importance of documentation that is specifically required. FAIS 220 talks about engagement acceptance and appointment, that is agreeing to the terms of engagement considering the degree of sensitivity and inherent risk. What are the draft engagement letter and how to obtain a written consent of the appointing shareholders, stakeholders, and also the preliminary and due diligence procedures undertaken to evaluate conditions of appointment prior to acceptance. That means once we accept an assignment, then after that we have to go full stream. What are the requirements of what are the skill sets that will be required, and how much of the skill sets we really have, and how much we might probably require to go to an expert. Just a word of caution, which I'm sure Naval will talk about. We have to be very careful at the time of the engagement, because we have to make sure that we understand the engagement completely. We don't over-promise and under-deliver. We need to be mindful of it. FAIS 230 is about the work, using the work of an expert, as I said earlier. That is, at times when it becomes necessary to engage an expert, then we need to do so, and the manner in which the documentation and the requirements, and we have to evaluate the qualifications, credentials of the expert, and define the scope and expected deliverables from the expert itself. And obviously, the work done by the expert, we are also responsible as primary investigators on the work of an expert, and that is why it is pretty important. And I'm sure Naval will delve deep into this particular standard. The last standard for the day will be FAIS 240, which is dealing with agencies. And this is a very, very important aspect in the entire FAIS, because this standard is the standard where we need to be very, very cautious, careful, and make sure that we are on the right track. Because the agencies will be relying on the work done by the FAIS practitioner and the documentation, due professional care, terms of engagement, chain of custody, non-disclosures that we have taken, retention of all the correspondence documents, defining protocols, legal aspects, role clarity, outlining the manner of providing agencies, evidences to the agency, and a whole host of things which I'm sure Naval is just raring to go to tell us all about these 4 standards. So I just thought it's necessary for me to just give this brief background. It's exactly about 6:30 is what I envisaged it to be. And let's, free flow now, Naval, for the rest of the time. That stage is all yours. And subsequently, we are open for questions at any point in time. And just as we did yesterday on the first day, and just as we did yesterday, I know Naval is very comfortable at any point in time. If there is any announcement by any participant, or if there's any other viewpoint, if there is a differing viewpoint, please do express it here and now, so that there is no interference, there's no disturbance. We will be able to address it. Naval will be able to address it, and between Naval and me, we'll make sure that the ball doesn't cross the boundary. So that's how I think we'll take the session. If there is any view that I have in addition to what Naval is saying, to enhance what he's saying, or sometimes to have a different view, I will also pitch in at that very moment. And let's have fun for the next 30 1 hour, 1.5 hours. Yeah, Gitju.
Thank you very much, Satish. Just 2 small announcement, Naval, with your permission. One is that Madam Archana Nigam, who was the former CGA and presently is the Chief Justice at Jodhpur, she'll join in tomorrow at the beginning, because she's having some court work right now today. So she will be inaugurating the tomorrow's session. And also we have a thanks from Professor Dr. Kiemet Kaliyat from Traika University, Turkey. So he just put in a hello to all the participants. So
Fantastic.
with that, Naval, over to you.
Fantastic.
Well,
so, Naval, I'm there right through. I'm there right through like yesterday. So
yes,
all the best, and let's have fun.
So thank you, Mr. Deepji Singhal and Mr. Satish Shenoy. First of all, for giving an elaborate introduction. I don't think someone would have introduced me so beautifully earlier. So thank you for that. And a very good evening to all. As you mentioned that a lot of people from outside India are also logged in, and I think it will be odd hours for them. Yes. So that explains the interest of the topic, and that also explains their own enthusiasm. So I congratulate all of you participants here. Being in the 3rd day, I think if you are continuing with this shows your passion towards the topic, because I think the key messages would have been done in the first and the second. So my job is a little difficult, but I'll still try to justify it. Now, having said that, before we set on to this journey of learning, as I always do, I would like to remember, being Hindu, I would like to remember Lord Ganesh and Ma Saraswati to bless all of us here, so that this discussion brings out some good learnings to all of us. And why I mention good learning for all of us, including myself, because this is a new topic. And this is an ever-changing topic. No one can claim that, forensic investigations and audits, I am an expert, because every time the fraudster keeps on coming with something new, then the regulation changes, then he comes with something new, then the regulation changes. So I think we will keep learning. And I think as part of study group, Satish sir, you would have realized how many different permutations and combinations you have discussed. I was lucky to be part of some of them. I can just imagine the pain that Institute has gone through, while formulating this. I think you picked up on 3 points relating to the first one was related to the mandatory part of it. So although I would like to just make one key point here, that although it's mandatory for chartered accountants, but practically, if we see most of the forensic practitioners, at least in India, are still chartered accountants. They do take help from others, like, lawyers. They will take help from digital forensic guys, and others, of course. And, I must say that they do add a lot of value. But the primary people, even in the investigation teams of the multinational consulting firms, we see they are chartered accountants. So it is very much applicable in practical way. That is number one. Number two, if I am sitting in industry and I have to give this assignment to an external service provider or a forensic accountant, then I would rather look for someone who agrees to abide by these standards. So rather, yes, I'll have to consider other things in QCDM, DM formats as we do evaluations. But this could be one of the evaluation criteria that, are you following these standards? And is your firm geared to follow these standards? Is your staff aware about these standards? Will give me a next level of assurance of the quality of the work that is going to be performed. And if you look at the similar, because I understand most of the colleagues here and in the audience we have internal auditors. If we see, IIS standards are not mandatory anywhere, but they are followed across the world because they are principle based and they can be applied to most of the situations in life, right? So I feel that these standards are a breakthrough, and they will definitely go a long way in defining how the forensic assignments or engagements are being done. Another important aspect, I think, Satish sir, you were there in the previous meeting which we had on FAIS, where one of the NFRA member, Mr. Anil Sharma, had joined. He had mentioned a very interesting point that a regulator is looking at ICAI standards whenever any case of indiscipline or complaint is coming to the regulator at the NFRA level. They are, even if the standards are mandatory or not mandatory, they are looking at the documentation of the ICAI and still trying to compare what was the actual behavior of the professional in that case, and then deciding accordingly. So that is also an important thing, how regulator is looking at the various pronouncements or standards being issued by the ICAI. So it becomes very important. Now, having said that, I would say that I was listening to Anand yesterday, and of course, he's a profound speaker and very good grip on the topic. And I think he talked about 100 series, in a very good fashion. So my task is a little eased out with the good background being given by Satish sir also just before I spoke. Today, I will focus on, covering 200 series, and I request to audience that any questions or comments can be shared by you in the chat box, which may be addressed during question and answer session or even during my presentation as well. So I'm very much comfortable, taking that. I acknowledge the presence of Archana Nigamji, Chief Justice of Jodhpur, as mentioned by Deepji, and also Professor Saab from Turkey. So thank you very much for joining in. And if you also have any comments, please do share with me, because I am equally eager to learn from all of you than only giving a lecture here. Now, coming to 200 series, I'll put up my presentation, but just to give you a quick idea, it is from page 50 to 78 of the ICAI compendium, so around 28 pages, and 4 standards, 210, 220, 230, and 240. So first one is engagement objectives, which will basically say, how we should define what is the objective, what is the scope, how we should go about it, what are the nuances. The second one talks about how we accept it and what are the pros and cons of doing that, what is the requirement as per standard. The third one talks about after you have taken it, if you need an expert, how to use that expert. And the fourth one talks about if you're dealing with a regulatory or enforcement agencies, then what are the additional requirements that you must keep in mind when doing a forensic FAI engagement. Sorry. Now that this concept, before I go into my presentation, is also important. FAI is defining 2 words separately. One is engagement, one is assignment, and I think Anand will cover that maybe tomorrow in 300 series. But it's good to point it out that engagement is an overall engagement. which the client has given to you, the end-to-end forensic engagement with a specific purpose and objective, etc. But if you get a part of that overall forensic engagement, you get involved into doing one part of it and supporting some other forensic professional for that will be called as an assignment. So I think this terminology must be kept in mind when I am explaining. I'll keep I'll try to make sure that I use the right word at the right place. So they are not interchangeable; they have different meanings, is what I wanted to say. Now let me just put up my presentation over there. Just give me a moment. Yes, Satish, you want to say?
Yeah, just one thing, that multiple assignments will make up an engagement. I think that is the way in which we can make this distinction. That multiple engagements, a set of multiple engagements, will step up into an engagement.
Sure. I think that helps me. Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay, so I'll just be in this mode only because I'll have to toggle a little bit here and there. As I already explained, I will be talking about 200 series. So just as a quick reminder, in the overall scheme of things, we have 100 series in the standards, then 200, then 300, 400, and 500. Till 300 series, Institute has already given the standards, overall total 13 standards. 400 and 500 series are under finalization, and they will be issued subsequently. But if you see the flow, the first one is talking about the key concepts. The second 200 series is talking about how to manage the engagement. And then the 300 is talking about executing it. 400 will talk about specialized areas, and 500 on the quality control. So this is an overall framework. So when we discuss the 200 series, you might get some questions about, okay, if I don't do it, who is going to check it, etc., etc. So don't worry, all that will be, getting answered in some subsequent, subsequent standards of the ICAI. But I'll focus on the content of the 200. Definitions, I'll not get deeper into it. I think they have been covered. But yes, basic principles in FAI. I will subsequently also cover this slide later, because there is one specific specific standard which again mentions that you have to take into account basic principles while doing an engagement. So I'll come back to that. But let's start with the standards. Okay, the first standard in the series, FAI 210, is talking about engagement objectives. Now, what does it talk about? It talks about, basically it talks about, it asks the professional means the person who has taken up the assignment, taken up the engagement, ask the professional to know what is the purpose and objective of the engagement very, very clearly. So whether it's a forensic accounting engagement, whether it's a investigation, or whether it's a litigations support engagement. And I'm not getting deeper into it because it is covered yesterday. But the key part is this standard asks the professional to be very clear which category of engagement this will be. And it also mentions in one of the clauses that it excludes any kind of engagement which involves giving expert testimony. Now, what is an expert testimony? Expert testimony means that to the best of my knowledge, expert testimony means that you have not done the, engagement or the forensic work yourself, but, you have been asked by, say, for example, a regulator or even an organization to give a second opinion on the work performed by someone else. So, for example, if you are a recognized, forensic expert, and then someone else would have done an engagement, sometimes the regulators have the tendency to get a second opinion from a completely independent party, which is appointed by the regulator themselves, rather than the person who has actually done the investigation or done the FAI engagement, because he or she is paid by that particular client. So just to avoid that conflict of interest. So this standard is not covering that kind of engagement. It is very clearly defined. Second thing is, coming to the requirements of it, it says that the scope shall be defined in line with the objective of the engagement. What is the overall objective of the engagement must be very clear. And the professional needs to establish through discussions and through study of the initials, whatever information is given by the client, on what is the primary purpose of, him being engaged, him or her being engaged. What are the scope and limitations on that scope? Because sometimes you will ask for something and they'll say, no, you will not do this. So it's very important to understand what is the exact scope to meet the objective and what are the limitations which are given by your client. And then what is the expected outcome? What exactly the client is looking at? So this has to be, as per this standard, has to be very clearly defined. Now I'll give you one example, why it is important. Especially in a FAI kind of practice, I have been on the consulting side as well. So and now in industry. So if you could see, I'll just give you one example. For example, let's take an example where a forged approval document, allegedly forged approval document is found by the internal audit function of a company. And then obviously, it has been, say, reported by the internal audit team. They have the suspicion that, this is a forged approval document. It's not a properly approved document. Now, the first step they have in their mind is to find out whether it's true, whether it's a forged document or not. And if yes, then who has done it? So at that stage, they might just engage you for finding this much only. So they will call, the most trusted forensic professional. Anyways, we all know that, forensic work is not given based on bids and quotes. It is given based on the trust. So you will simply get a call that, okay, boss, this has happened. Please send in your team and I want to get this evaluated without even, any discussion on the rates and all, depending upon the urgency, of course. So, initial scope is this. Right? The standard says, yes, you need to understand what exactly they're asking. So initial scope is this. Later on, you have already sent your team, no contract is in place, no engagement letter is in place practically. And then later on, once you are able to establish, yes, it is a forged document, then the next question automatically comes. Okay, why he would have done it? Who all are involved? And, what is the mechanism involved? Why was it not caught earlier? Are there more instances like this in the company? So that is like, making your scope 300% of what you initially were engaged for. So this standard is very important to be understood. This standard doesn't say on the first day itself, you should have a clarity. And it also doesn't say that it should be fixed throughout your assignment, engagement. What it says is at all point in time, you must be very clear what you are doing, why you are doing, and for whom you are doing, and what are your limitations. And you must always keep that recorded somewhere. It doesn't say that, you cannot be adaptive. You have to be adaptive practically. But what it says is it must be documented somewhere and it must be very clear through discussions with your stakeholders. Second example I'll give you, just to make it more clear is, say you are investigating a particular non-compliance, say, okay, let me give let me think about an example where you get to know that someone was carrying on a business parallelly. Someone, as an employee was carrying on a parallel business, which is obviously not allowed as per the code of conduct and all that of the company and the employment contracts. So as a professional, you are engaged by the company and you start doing an investigation, etc. Later on, you come to know that this guy was actually carrying out some chit fund business. Okay, let's assume this is a pure hypothetical example. Okay, and obviously because this is a financial crime, then the local police and other regulators have already got into it. Now the scope of the professional who is doing the engagement for the company would definitely go a change, and the level of precaution, the objective of the investigation, everything, and also the involvement of the legal team, etc., will go to a much, a deeper extent, because they know that today they are doing you are doing an investigation for internal purpose. What is the objective of your internal purpose? You are just you will be as an organization just bothered about, how come this guy was running a business without anyone knowing about it, whether his manager knew about it, whether his colleagues knew about it, why did not if someone was aware, why they did not report it to the management of the company, through the whistleblower guidelines, etc. And, now that we are getting it identified, how is it that we can improve the code of conduct implementation and all that, general stuff. But when it gets into the, the financial crime side of it, obviously you will ask the professional to be much more careful in terms of what documentation it is creating. And, you'll try to make sure that, at least the company reputation is not put at stake. And you are also able to establish through that, FAI engagement, that company has taken all the reasonable steps not to, have such an employee. But later on, if someone does it, it's not company's fault, or it's not the fault of the management of the company. So the nature of it can change based on these two examples which I just quoted. So the key thing is basically that you need to keep engaged with your stakeholders on a continuous basis and keep recording, based on whatever discussions you have. Another important aspect of this standard is keeping the ethical safeguards in place. Now, what do we mean by that? Okay, so I'll go to the next slide simultaneously. Yeah, sorry. So what do we mean by that? What is ethical safeguards? So the standard says, and I'm just reading it, if there are any concerns that the work of the professional may be misused for any unethical purposes, then the professional may choose not to accept such an engagement. So till then it's okay, I don't like this, it is unethical, I will not do it. But standard doesn't stop there. Standard further says, adequately documenting and communicating the reasons for the same. So I feel that there is an additional responsibility put on the professional to document it, why I am not doing it. So this is important to be taken care. So you would be wondering, when will that happen? But I'll give you two examples. And this happened with one of my, previous colleagues. They were out there for a meeting with a client. The client said, hey, I am getting business by bribing government officials. Okay. So the first statement was this. The second statement from the potential client was, I am giving this much of money through this intermediary to so and so people, but I'm not sure whether the entire money is reaching to the right guy, whatever has been committed. What I want you to do is, please try to find out whether he is giving the amount which is telling me to the official or not. This was the offer of the assignment. Now, in this kind of scenario, the standard clearly says you have to refuse it, and you have to document why you are not refusing, why you are refusing it. You cannot take it because it is completely unethical. You are supporting him in doing something unethical. But this happens. And in fact, he had the veracity to say, I don't need a formal report. You just simply let me know whether he's paying the, the right guy or not. And I'm sure a lot of forensic professionals do come across these kind of situations. This is just one of them that I've quoted. Another one could be another example of ethical safeguard. If, for example, we feel that a particular company is going to be under an investigation by, say, SEBI or any other regulator like Enforcement Directorate, right? And that particular company wants to prepare for the investigation, in advance. Sometimes they might offer you to, do an investigation or internal records, etc., to for you to, help them prepare for the case, to support their attorney. Now, can we accept it after this clause of the standard? I think you know the answer, so I'll not answer that. So, another important aspect of the engagement letter is important, that objective should not be designed to commit in any particular outcome. You cannot say that, okay, I will make sure that this guy is accused and completely proven that he has done the fraud. No, you cannot do that. It can only be saying that you will be able to draw some reasonable conclusions, whether it is proved, disproved, or not proved, as we discussed yesterday as well. So, just wrapping up on this first standard which we were discussing, the professional's responsibility is clearly defined to set the objective of the FAI engagement is the first requirement. They have given the indicative list, so you can actually go through that annexure 1 of this standard and then easily find out where you will fit in. But one of the interesting observation I made, now I remember, was this indicative list doesn't include the due diligence, which is a very, very, usual assignment that, forensic professionals are doing. So if, where will it fall? To my interpretation, it will fall somewhere in category B, which is investigation services, but it could actually fall in A and B both, because it will require forensic accounting, its, skills also, and B. But maybe, later on guidance notes will, clarify that. Why it is important to understand A, B, and C, which category is, because subsequent standards, when you go to 300 series, I think they will ask you to basically define in your engagement letter that which category of assignment you are doing. So it is important to know. Now, another, aspect which, I would like to stress here is on the documentation part. What is the documentation? As per the standard is clearly laid down, even your initial correspondence, MOMs, complaint copy, etc., all the email exchanges, etc., whatever is shared, they're all documentation relevant to this standard must be preserved. It's not that, you will wait for only the final engagement letter to be signed and then you will preserve.
Well, can I just stop you, please?
Yeah.
What you just said was just for the benefit of all the participants. All due diligence exercises which are conducted would fall under the FAIS standards.
Yes, they will.
Right. So basically, these standards will apply to all the due diligence exercises or assignments which are conducted by professionals across.
Yes.
Correct.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. And you have to put it under one of those brackets, depending on the specific wordings of the engagement.
Either forensic accounting or investigation or one of the
Either
buckets.
A or B. Either A or B.
Right.
Yeah.
Because due diligence is the most commonly performed
Yes.
activity.
exercise. Yeah. Sorry, Naval, please.
Yeah, and
Yeah, no.
Naval, your examples that you gave are purely hypothetical. Obviously, there is no.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's wonderful examples and absolutely to the point. It has explained the point and with beautiful hypothetical examples.
No, it is reinforcing the standards, please.
Absolutely.
Correct. So the documentation part, I was just stressing that we will have to, as a professional, the standard asks us to keep, all this correspondence in safe custody. So even the first email that came to you from your client is equally important as your engagement letter, is what I'm trying to say. So with this, let's go to the next standard. If any of you have any questions on this standard, I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll go to the next standard. Okay, I don't see any chat questions.
I think you should go to the next question. Next one.
Sure. Thank you very much. So the next standard is on engagement, acceptance, and appointment. Now that we already discussed about the first standard, I think this one will become easier to understand. So what are the key elements of this standard? The first point which it comes out with is that engagements come with a degree of sensitivity and inherent risk in it. So the preliminary procedures, as I mentioned, that the client will simply ask you to come, without even having any kind of legal arrangement and everything. So those are called preliminary procedures. So your preliminary procedures and your due diligence is very important. But the standard asks you to undertake preliminary procedures aimed at getting an understanding about the nature and complexity of the engagement, and also conduct a due diligence directed to gain an assessment of the inherent risks. Now, what are these inherent risks? There could be that, the stakeholder, they have some kind of conflict of interest with the assignment objective itself. For example, yesterday, one of the hypothetical situation Anand was sharing was that what if, you are engaged by a person who himself has done the fraud. So this is one of the hypothetical, conflict of interest, which you will not find on the first day itself, but you might find during your preliminary procedures. So the standard asks you to be aware, you means the professional to be aware about this aspect, keep that in the mind when the initial preliminary procedures and the due diligence is being conducted. And it also asks that you identify the key stakeholders and individuals covered under the scope, and also to identify the direct as well as indirect users of the engagement report. So not only your work, what you are going to do and to whom you are going to give, but also where your report is going to be used, because the procedures and everything will change. So if the client says it's for internal, organization purpose, then you will make a report in a different way. And if it is for a court purpose, then of course, it will be done in a different way. And the standard says that a written engagement letter shall be signed, or a letter of appointment in case of government agencies must be there to confirm the terms of the appointment. And if you are not accepting the engagement, then you must give, you must communicate the reasons for not accepting them. So acceptance is complete when engagement letter is signed, but of course the standard says that as the engagement progresses, you can always change and modify these terms and engagements. I will give you one example. For example, yesterday also I was listening to Anand, and there was a discussion about conflict of interest about stakeholders. Now, we did discuss about, a particular stakeholder involving you, engaging you for doing an investigation. And during your preliminary procedures, if you find out that there is a conflict of interest, what do? You have already spent some number of hours, and of course, the standard is very clear. You have to basically say no after that and then stop doing it, or you have to change the stakeholder. Now, in one of the hypothetical example I will say is, say, let's assume that there is a MNC working here in India, for example, and they have their headquarters somewhere in Europe, maybe, and let's assume that a small employee fraud or procurement fraud has happened, and you have been engaged by a senior management person of the company. Later on, you find out that he himself had some kind of conflict of interest within 1 week or 10 days of your team actually being on the ground. What do you do in this case? I think the two things which can be done, which are not, of course, in the standard, but practical situation I'm sharing, is trying to know whether there can be any possibility to engage with anyone above, or senior, or who doesn't have a conflict of interest, number one. Number two, bringing it to the notice. And as per the standard, as I mentioned, you have to communicate in writing in terms of why you're not continuing with this, engagement. So you will have to record it also. I think this has two benefits. Number one, the other person knows that that he is involved somewhere. So in terms of the risk that was discussed yesterday, why I brought this example was, in case the other person knows that, you can expose him, definitely your fees is not at risk, sir. You will definitely get your fees. This was my personal interpretation. Another, hot topic being discussed these days is related to, so for example, valuation of, public sector undertakings. You would be reading, so many of articles or social media posts on, how PSUs have been, valued at a lesser amount of money than their actual valuation and all that. All those are allegations. No one knows what is the truth. But if you, for example, if a forensic professional is engaged in, assessing that kind of a situation, then of course your engagement and everything has to be very, very clear, and you cannot be engaged by the person, who is actually doing the valuation or who is actually responsible for that. But in such scenario, if you are being engaged, why I brought this up is, if you are being engaged by a politically exposed person, as we all understand, then you be able to maintain your independence. You have to evaluate that. And if you are not able to maintain your independence, why I bring independence is the basic principle, because all of the standards, whatever I'm reading, the first line on first page of each of the standard is they have to be read in conjunction with the three basic documents which Satish sir would have explained on the first day: the preface, the framework, and the basic principles. So independence is the basic principle. So in this scenario, during the preliminary work, if you come to know that, you will not be able to maintain your independence at that towards the end of the assignment, you have to say, no, I will not be doing it. And you have to record your reasons and come out of it. This is the standard requirement.
Naval, there is a request if you can put it on the presentation mode so that, the font becomes a little bigger for them to read.
Oh, okay. Sir. Okay. Is it visible now? Hello?
Yes. It is visible better. Yeah, much better. Yeah. Perfect.
So in terms of wrapping up on this one, as I mentioned, formal engagement letter is required. In terms of conditions on the preliminary procedures, we have to evaluate on the independence. Capability assessment means whether I can do this job itself, whether I'm capable, whether I have that. Then laws and regulations. I think this is very important, laws and regulations. I have to see whether I'll be able to meet the laws and regulations. Constraints, limitations, time limits, all that has to be seen. In due diligence, one important thing is availability to systems and information. A lot of times, if the information itself, and I think we are all internal auditors, most of us, we all know, how critical is the information. But as internal auditor, you have to trust the other party. You have to ask the information. They will give the information, and you have to take it prima facie on its face value and then do your analysis. But in FAI assignment, you have to doubt everything that comes on your table. So in this kind of scenario, most of the time, the challenge which comes in is that, if it is told to you, no, you will not get the access to the entire system, or maybe you are not able to get the laptop access or entire email access. Or, for example, one of the situations is you find out that the accused has, wiped out the entire laptop and all that. So the standard is in this kind of, typical situations, standard is asking you to record these kind of limitations within your engagement letter so that later on there is no problem. It should be known to the stakeholders what are your limitations. So it is very important point. Fees and the costs, that has to be taken care of, because we can talk about the moon, but everything comes with a cost. So that is very important to be discussed at the forefront itself. If you're not getting the money, how will you do the assignment or the engagement? And completion of the acceptance basically will happen when you have the signed EL as per the standard. But one of the aspect that I wanted to highlight here was that's engagement letter could say some your standard is saying that once you have signed the engagement letter, it is a acceptance. But if you actually go into the contract act, and not the contract act, but actually, if you actually try to see how the courts have been, interpreting acceptance part of it, it may be slightly different. In fact, whenever the litigations are happening between the companies also on various other contracts, not the forensic engagements, courts are even looking at the emails, prior to, after, signing of the contract, etc. So I wanted to highlight this, that although the standard says that signed EL is, the acceptance, yes, it is, but even if you have some email communication acceptance and all that, I think from a contract act perspective, it should be still fine. That is my perspective.
Correct. Absolutely. That was also discussed.
Okay. And then modified conditions, if during the start of the engagement, you evaluated, you did the due diligence, everything was fine. But later on, you come across a stumbling block where you're not able to perform your duty. The standard very clearly says that you have to withdraw from the engagement, as I gave some examples as well. Now,
Naval, just a corollary to that, there was a question by Raj. During the execution of the engagement, if additional requirement comes up, which is not there in the engagement letter, necessary for conducting the engagement effectively, then what do you do?
Yes, as I explained, the standard clearly says you have to modify the terms and conditions. You have to record it somewhere. It's not, only signing for the engagement letter only. You can record it with the stakeholder clearly identified, along with the fees and cost, of course, and then go ahead with it. That is what the standard says.
The second question is, again repeating, does due diligence assignment gets covered under FIAS? Please repeat. That is what was mentioned earlier.
I will give that to Satish, sir.
No, actually, see, it depends on the type of the due diligence. I mean, we have due diligence for so many aspects, but
Yes.
wherever there is any tinge of any one of those three, not really litigation, due diligence for litigation, but anywhere, wherever it comes under the category A or B, we will, it depends on case to case, but largely the answer is yes. But we'll have to examine each and every specific instance when it comes to. I saw that question, and I thought that this is might be an appropriate answer. But as we said that these are all new standards, we are all searching, we are all waiting for the things, the developments as they come up. But directionally, if you ask me, the answer should be. I don't know whether I fully answered the question, but this much information is probably available on the table.
I think in any assignment, there may be gray areas, but in any assignment to be rendered by a professional, if the principles of a standard are followed, it will only go to protect the professional.
Absolutely.
And also render the service a good service.
Absolutely.
A quality service.
Absolutely, because even where some things are missed out, but the entire process was followed. Whatever was expected of you, you have done that. Then there is at least some relief from the machinery. Whatever machinery is available from the agencies, there is some relief that at least the basic principles were followed, and the outcome was whatever was the outcome is the outcome. I agree with you. Perfect.
Yeah, and just to add, if you look at the definition of the three category of those forensic engagements that are defined by the standard, I think due diligence does get covered there.
Yes.
They're very generic. Yeah. And it has not been excluded. So for example, that expert testimony has been specifically excluded, but this one is not excluded. So I will assume that it is very much covered. Now coming to this annexure 1 of this, this particular standard FAIS 220, it talks about typical contents of engagement letter. Now I have tried to put one particular clause especially, which says, and I'm reading it, scope of coverage. So the first thing is clauses concerning the nature of engagement. It says in this list of annexures. And the second bullet of that is scope of coverage, including reference to applicable legislation, regulations, or pronouncements of professional bodies or any limitations. Now, this is again, indicative. This is typical content. It's not mandatory that you have to put everything. But looking at the list that I have put it on the slide, look at IPC, Evidence Act, PMLA, IBC, and all that other things. If you are putting this in your engagement letter, you are supposed to know this. So what I wanted to highlight here is maybe because chartered accountants are not typically known to be experts of all these laws. Yes, you can read it, you can have general knowledge, but you can't be expert. So maybe this aspect maybe need to be addressed when the guidance note comes in.
Absolutely.
If the expectation is that everyone should know about it, then it has to be categorically brought into the course curriculum of the revised FAFD course. Satish sir?
Very true. I think there was a lot of discussions on this aspect as well. In fact, the annexure as it originally stood, it itself went into some five pages when it was first cast. And then we said that again, we reminded ourselves that this is principle based and it's only about the what and it's not about the how. And therefore, some portions of it were retained. But all these will get addressed in the implementation guide. If not in the guidance note, will come in the implementation guide. And of course, as and when the standards become mandatory, the implementation guides, of course, is only recommended. So that's how I think the whole design principle is there. In fact, I also made a comment in the beginning that we should have actually got all these documents out at the same time. But given the constraint of how it was thought of, the urgency of actually having it, and so many other things that actually work out in the background of the CA Institute, which we don't really want to go into it. The documents won't come out simultaneously, but I'm sure it will get addressed. At least the basic document is out. I think that is the takeaway for all of us. I do agree.
Deepji, you are on mute, I think.
Yeah. You wanted to say something, Dipji?
Just
Yeah.
one more question from Georgie Matthews. Is due diligence in this context, what Naval just explained, is that due diligence the professional should follow before accepting the assignment?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Answer is yes.
Yeah.
Before accepting, but acceptance means signing the engagement letter. It is not before even starting your preliminary work. You can start preliminary work because the nature of work itself is that it is like a fire. You have to reach at the station to douse the fire. You can't tell your client, first of all, I'll do the due diligence and then I'll come. Then you will not be hired, So that is very much acknowledged within the standard on a careful reading. But yes, when you are going to formalize it, then all these things have to be kept in mind. And if subsequently you find out that it is not working out, you have to say, bye-bye, I will not be able to do it, and record the reasons and go. This is what basically the summary is. Now, one last important point I wanted to highlight, which is not as per the standard, but I thought it's very important to bring out, is that there are certain regulatory reporting obligations on all of us professionals, actually. That, for example, if you have, if you during the course of your assignment, any assignment, if you find out, a money laundering case or a terrorist financing that is happening, or some drugs related financing that is happening, or some tax evasion, etc., there are separate laws, and I am not getting into the details of that, which actually mandate it to the professionals to report it to the relevant authority, even without having any concurrence from your clients. So we need to be very careful about that. Those things are not being handled by the standards, but they are very much applicable on this entire profession. I just wanted to make a mention of that. Should I go further?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So the
Dipji,
next
we'll take that question later on. That one last question which has come, we'll take it later. Let's move ahead. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So the next one is using the work of an expert. As we say, what is an expert? And simply, I'll just toggle a little bit and also look at, just a minute, sir. Yes. So the expert, as per the standard, I'll just make it a little bigger for the audience so that they're able to see it at least. Is my slide visible now?
We can see the same one, that using work of an expert.
Okay, great. So,
but again, it has moved into that. You can put it on slide, whatever.
Okay. Just a minute. I'll go to slide mode.
Yes, no problem.
So, expert, as per the standard, is person possessing special skills or domain expertise, along with relevant experience and expertise in a particular area, field, or discipline. That is how it is defined. Now, what does it mean? We are also all experts, like chartered accountant is an expert. But the expert in this case is anyone who is having an expertise, apart from what we have, basically. So this is like an expertise which we don't have. We are talking about that expert. So what is that expertise? Handwriting expert, digital forensic expert, documentation aging expert, or any domain expert of a particular industry or asset valuations, etc. This is the expert that we are talking about. The requirement of the standard is the professional should seek the authority to select, appoint, and engage expert where needed. Just a minute, Satish sir, I'll just take a quick call. Someone is calling me. Sorry for this. Yeah. So the professional to seek the authority to select, appoint, and engage the expert. So wherever the professional or the person who has got the engagement is going to hire an expert, he has to first of all seek the authority from the client. It's not that you can do it on your own. The standard says you have to seek the authority to select, appoint, and engage the expert. And the second situation is where you are not doing it, then you have to If someone else is doing, if you, for example, your client is going to do it, then you have to evaluate the independence and objectivity of the expert appointed by others. This is very important. Second important aspect is professional shall evaluate the qualifications and the credentials of the expert also. Third important point is professional shall participate in defining the scope and expected deliverables for the work to be conducted by the expert. Fourth point, professional shall evaluate the adequacy of the work conducted by the expert to ensure evidence discovered constitutes sufficient, this is the word, sufficient and reliable evidence. And to last key point is professional to retain ultimate responsibility for conclusions of the expert. So what comes out based on these 5 points is, if you see that even if you are engaging an expert, the overall responsibility very much is with the professional who has been given the engagement. So I'll just quickly move to the key aspect of it. Yeah. So the practical, now let's talk about some practical situations. So monetary aspect is, critical in actual situations, because when you are engaging an expert, then of course you have to negotiate and, see what is the costing environment. And then it is very important to go back to your client and also, engage them. That is what the standard says, although it doesn't talk about monetary aspect, but I thought that this is important to be highlighted. And the word used is to assist. Assist means overall responsibility remains with the FAI professional. Expert is just going to assist you. Then wherever the findings are going of the expert will form to be part of the report, professional shall participate in defining scope and expected deliverables, as I mentioned. So, as I already mentioned, so overall responsibility remains with you. The last point of this slide is very important, where the determination is made that the work conducted by the expert is inadequate or insufficient, then as a professional, my duty shall be to agree on the nature and extent of further work to be performed by the expert or perform alternative work procedures myself. So ultimately, again, standard is very clear. It is your responsibility. You are authorized. You can, engage an expert, but you have to make sure that overall, you have to take care of the entire thing. I would like to go to the next standard if there is no other question in this.
In fact, Naval, even in the Provident Fund Act in India, the labor laws, I mean, the principle of the concept of primary responsibility, the principal employer, and all
Yes.
these regulations are almost similar, because ultimately you have appointed the contractor, and therefore the responsibility of compliance for the Provident Fund for the benefit of the workmen is entirely, on the principal employer. So
Yes.
here also this expert is there. Of course, he's an expert in his chosen field, but
Yes.
he's only doing one part of the work. But ultimately, the entire engagement has been taken up by the FAIS, and therefore by the FAI professional, and therefore it's onerous, and rightly so. It's onerous on the part of the FAI professional to take overall responsibility of the overall engagement. However, the specific work that the expert did, of course, he is responsible, because he's really an expert in that. As you said, the signature, the handwriting experts, etc.
Yes.
They are able to define whether it's a forged document, whether it's actually his handwriting, etc.
Yes.
For that, of course, he is responsible. So
yes.
I
think this standard goes a long way in ensuring the credibility of the FAI professional who is following the standard,
Absolutely.
because it fixes up the responsibility. So as a client, I'll be, very keen to ask my service provider that whether you are going to adhere to this standard or not.
Absolutely.
So I think it goes a long way in, improving the credibility, also the accountability of the professionals.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. I think let's move on.
Okay.
And then we can take all the questions which is
Sure.
there on the chat box later.
Okay, so
We are doing well on time as well. So absolutely go ahead. What say, Dibji? We are right, no?
Absolutely fine.
Yeah, first.
You're absolutely on time.
Yeah, great.
You're doing well. Slowly, nicely,
Perfect.
with a lot of examples from Naval, from his
Yes, yes.
practical exposure.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Okay, great. So let us go to this next FAIS, which is 240, which is talking about engaging with agencies. So these are agency means here the regulatory agencies or the government part of it. So I'll just give some pointers and then come to the slide again.
Again, Naval, just full screen, please.
Okay.
I think he can't see the.
Okay. So, so basically the professional is required to engage. Oh, okay, sorry. Again, I think there is some problem. Just a minute, huh? I'll just fix it. Can you see my presentation?
Yes,
We
but
can see it not yet in that full mode.
Not in full mode, huh?
No.
But I already put it. Okay, just a minute.
Maybe slideshow, remove slideshow, something is coming on the top. Resume slideshow, something we can see near that person. Now.
yeah, no, at the bottom there is you can just, no.
Yeah.
I removed it and then I put it again.
Yeah. Great. Thanks.
So this one is the last one in the 200 series. It talks about professional dealing with the regulatory agencies when the engagement nature is such that you have to deal with them. Then what are the nuances? It tries to define certain things, and I think it is helpful for the professional to understand what are the extra precautions that you must take in terms of working with the regulatory side of it. Now, the requirement is that professionals should agree on the objective, scope, and planned procedures, which applies to everything. But in this case, the standard will give some examples like not only an engagement letter, which is drafted usually by the professional, but it could be some letter of acceptance, or it could be terms of reference, whatever document name, depending upon the agency with whom you are working. So it says that you can basically you have to define the objective, scope, and planned procedures, but in whatever name called, basically. That is an important thing.
Here, the only caveat, Naval, I remember the discussions that we were having when the standard was being made. Many times, most of the practitioners have mentioned that the government sometimes doesn't even have a standard engagement letter, and they just say that you guys just go ahead and give us a report. So at that time, we need to be a little cautious, and a lot of discussion happened about saying that at least we should send a mail out from our side that this is what I've understood the assignment to be.
Correct.
So that at a later date, at least that will be the document that will probably save us. Ideally, of course, it is best to get an engagement letter formally signed. But if that doesn't happen, then we obviously need to see what the next best thing is. And the next best thing was discussed as this particular aspect. At least you send out a mail. It also happens, many times when there is some oral conversation, which is not recorded, and maybe for some reason we could even record that conversation. Then in that case, the best way to do it is to actually kind of send out a mail saying that this is what we discussed, so that becomes kind of a evidence which supports. So that's the way we would probably, like a compensatory control. Ideal would be to have a proper control, but if the proper control for whatever reason is not possible, then we rely on the compensatory control. So it's some parallel I can draw from that, and that was what I remember was clearly discussed when we were talking about engaging agents.
No, very interesting insight. In fact, I would just like to compliment what you said. I'll give you, I have recently looked at, again with the while discussion with a friend. There was a case of a cooperative society where some irregularity was there, and some of the non-office bearers, they moved to the court of law and saying that there are irregularities, and then we want you to investigate that. What court order says, one pager, it says conduct a forensic audit of affairs of the cooperative society. Full stop.
They'll stop.
Now, how will you define what you are going to do? What is the period which you are going to talk?
Perfect.
Etc. So I completely, understand from where you're coming, sir, Satish sir. So yes, and that is why the first standard which I explained is very important. Even if you don't have an engagement letter, please have it documented somewhere. As long as it is clarified with your stakeholder, it is all fine.
Absolutely.
And as you rightly mentioned, if they are not giving you some document, please create one and then give it to them so that you are safe later.
Perfect. Absolutely spot on.
Brought up this point.
Spot on.
Now, talking about nuances of this, let me go to the next slide. So the standard says that, the professional either can be a service provider or it can be also, working in the official capacity of representing the agency itself. So sometimes you will have a situation where you are asked to do a particular assignment as a service provider, or sometimes you are working along with them. So this standard is covering both the situations. The second part is Annexure 1 gives an indicative list of what are these, agencies, and they have categorized it into 3, I think. Just a moment. Yeah, there you go. So 3. So one is law enforcement agencies, which cover CBI, ED, EOW, SFIO, IBBI, DGIT, DGG, STI, CERT, NCRB. Second classification in annexure is regulatory bodies like RBI, SEBI, IRDAI. They have, kept it different. And the third is adjudicating authorities, which is like NCLT and ITAT. And I think that covers 99% of the forensic that the professionals will get in India. So it basically is, although there is no guidance note, I would say, Satish sir, but I think standards have tried to give that guidance part also somewhere to help the professionals. Now, coming to terms of engagement part of it, as I was explaining, it says it can be a letter of appointment, it can be work order, it can be engagement letter, or other suitable form. So I think Satish sir was trying to highlight the other suitable form, part of it. And change in scope must be documented. That is what the standard says. There is another reference which has been made in this standard to digital evidence discovery, which will be defined somewhere in FAIS 520, which is yet not it is still in draft, I think. So it has not been issued. So we cannot clarify that part. When the standard is issued, we'll discuss about that. But a clear reference has been made because most of the times, if you see, regulatory agencies or these agencies are engaging professionals on the digital part. Actually, rest of the things they are also able to handle.
Of course, even the digital discoveries, FAIS 520 has already been exposed, so it is in public domain.
Yes,
it's been exposed,
but not issued.
Comments.
Yes, correct.
Comments have not yet been reviewed. I do agree, but
yes.
It is yet. I mean, it is in public domain.
Draft is available on the institute website. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Now, coming to the practical side of it, which I wanted to discuss, confidentiality is very important. Now, the standard addresses confidentiality from the professional side, the responsibility of the professional. It says, you should make sure as a professional that, confidentiality is maintained. And it defines, it asks the professional to have periodic communication and with its team members. It says that you need to have an authorization process on need to know basis, how to share information with anyone, with its team members. It also mentions specifically that you need to have a non-disclosure process implemented within your teams. So these are specifically mentioned. So that's why I feel that professionals will have to implement it, because it is very much, it doesn't say, take suitable measures. It doesn't say that. It's very, very specifically mentioned. So there is, the intention is very clear. You have to do it. And then within the confidentiality, securing the evidence and documents for longer durations is also specifically mentioned, because when you're dealing with agencies, government agencies, regulatory agencies, you know that the cases could go on for years and years in India. So you need to maintain the physical or the digital form in a proper way, is also defined by the standard very clearly. And the documentation of any kind of correspondence with the agency with whom you are working is a must as per the standard. Let's talk about other practical aspects. I think this will be interesting.
I think, Naval, when we are talking about securing evidence and documents for longer duration in a physical and digital form, so what is longer duration?
It is not defined in the standard. It says that, because you are dealing with agency, so it might be required to be retained for a longer duration, but it doesn't define what is longer duration. And of course, applying common sense, it will be at least during the entire tenure of the entire thing. And knowing the legal system, you can, from High Court, you'll go to Supreme Court. So unless and until it is Supreme Court decided, you can continue to keep it.
Yeah.
It's perpetual.
And it is in best interest that it is done. I mean, though we may have,
Yes.
company law and others saying 8 years, income tax saying 8 years, 16 years, and what have you, so far as the documentation is concerned. I think in this case, there is an override on that. And it is in our own interest to do so. It is in our own interest.
Yes, very well said, sir. So now let's talk about other practical aspects, which I didn't find in the standard, for example, but important to highlight. First is the confidentiality, Confidentiality, the standard says I have to maintain the confidentiality, but practically, what about the confidentiality of my work by the regulator itself? It doesn't talk about that, and it cannot talk about that. But why I am highlighting it here is, that is also one of the important nuance which we need to keep in mind when working with the agencies, because you have to be very, very sensitive about, what information can be leaked out from the agency part also sometimes, and it can actually hit your own reputation.
Yeah.
Big way.
That's the unfortunate part, Naval, because ultimately we can work only in our circle of influence.
Correct.
Just as the ICAI is working within its own circle of influence, as Stephen Covey
Yes.
also said, that you have to work within your circumference. I mean, your own circle of influence. So these things are obviously out of our thing. It is a good to have, but we cannot mandate. I mean, when I say we means, I mean the ICAI is not in a position to mandate.
Yes, correct. The other aspect is way of working. So our working will be very professional, will be very much within the limits of the law and all that. But because the law enforcement agencies like police, they have the access of even, slapping someone, for example, just to get an information. So you will get a little caught off of your guard sometimes, and you have to deal with this situation. But the standard is very clear. As a professional, we have to be compliant with the legal regulations. So you are, of course, not authorized to do anything like that. If they are doing it, please let them do it. Advantage of working in this kind of assignment is a sea of information is available. You have no dearth of information. You can get many, many insights. You will get CDRs. You will get, exact locations of people. You can search through the bank accounts. Everything will be available at your doorstep if you're doing it. But at the same time, looking at the scope, objective, we need to be very mindful, okay, what you are going to do. And as I mentioned, risk of bad publicity. For example, you are doing an assignment which as I mentioned earlier, ethical safeguard thing. But even if it is not ethical safeguard issue, even if you are doing a normal investigation for a particular organization, later on you find out that government has got into it, and they also want to do the similar thing. There is always a risk of bad publicity to the organization also, and those things have to be taken care based on engagement to engagement basis. But it has to be kept in mind that those things are very sensitive, and whenever any regulator or agency is involved in a particular matter, whatever is being discussed or being done has to be in consultation with at least a legal professional. That's what I would say. It's not mentioned specifically in the standard, but practically it is required to be done. So that was it from my side on this. But why I highlight this basic principles of FAI towards the end, because this is the start, and then it has to be reminded again at the end. Everything that we discussed till now is ultimately falling into these principles. We discussed about how to ensure quality and how to maintain continuous improvement. We discussed about independence, integrity, objectivity, due professional care, skills, primacy of truth. As Satish sir mentioned initially, it has to be truth, and everyone should be able to interpret your evidence in the same consistent way. and separating facts from opinions, and at last, as we discussed at length, about the confidentiality. So the basic principles are, again, I wanted to reinforce that, and they are mentioned very specifically in this standard of agencies, working with agencies specifically once again. So I think they are important. At last, before going into the Q&A, I wanted to highlight some other general aspects also for the benefit of audience, and I would love to share some views on that. Digital evidence usage, especially if we are talking about personal evidence usage, what are the implications? Because the standard has simply said that you have to abide with the laws and regulations, right? When we are talking about, say, you have done a forensic imaging of laptop of one alleged, accused, for example, you find out some personal information out of that, say a bank statement or some other things, right? Can you use it? Can you quote it? I think the question is relevant because it has its own legal implications. For example, if the employment contract of a particular organization, of that particular employee, says that anything that you are storing in this laptop is all company information, and you should not be using it for any other purpose, then you can definitely use it. You can assume that as per the contract, this is the official information. On the other hand, let's assume that the contract says that you can use this laptop for, the contract says that comply with the IT policy, simple. And the IT policy says you can use the company, IT assets for majority of the professional purpose, but sometimes for the personal purpose also. Let's assume a hypothetical example. Then you are constrained. You cannot use it. If there is a folder that which in this scenario, in the second scenario, if there is a folder which says personal, you are not supposed to use it. If there are password protected files like bank statements and other things, you're not supposed to use it unless and until you are protected by the government contract. This is one example. See, I am also not a lawyer, but based on experience, I'm sharing. So these are some nuances which all the forensic professionals have to basically keep themselves aware about. Aware, only then we'll be able to meet the standard requirement actually. The other aspect which I wanted to highlight was on the rights of, for example, in interviews, towards the end of it, like we do, you should not be able to, they should not be able to allege that you have, done coercion, and, you are asking questions totally irrelevant and asking some personal family questions and all that, which is not in the subject matter. You are not giving them the respectable treatment. For example, if you are having an interview and the other guy says, I am hungry, you have to give him food, right? You have to give him tea and water. You cannot say that, no, you are not allowed to do this and all that. These are the laws, laws and regulations. Practicality is different, but what is legal requirement I'm trying to say. For example, if you are interviewing a female, person, it is advisable to keep another female with you, especially HR and legal being present. And recording, if you are doing, you have to do it with permission. These are some examples, and there are many more nuances. So the key point which is coming out of this slide for me is there is very simple line mentioned in the forensic FAI standards that we have to meet the laws and regulations, but there is a huge implication of that line, and we have to be very much aware about what they are. So that is it from my side. At least, I'll be more than happy to take any questions.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much, Naval. I think there are a few questions. I think one is from Ranjana. Regulatory reporting obligations, it can be report without concurrence from the client, but some clients want to show the report before sharing the regulatory report to client.
Yeah, this question had come up at the time when, Naval was saying that, at that sometimes the regulators require us to, give them some report. So I think the question is more directed on whether this has to first go through the client. The client obviously would like us to, have the first eye on it. And that's, so Naval, what is your view on this?
See, I was talking about situations of money laundering, drug financing, terrorist financing. So answer is very clear. You have to report to the regulator without telling client. Otherwise, they will not allow you to do it. Of course.
Absolutely. It's at a different level. at
Yes.
which the like narcotics or something like that.
Yes,
If there is
exactly.
something which is there on that score, then it takes a little different tinge. But not
Yes.
to scare the people on board. It's not
Yeah.
that. But if
Yes.
in severe cases, I think you require severe action. But
Yes.
on a normal case, I think we should not fear about all these kind of
Yeah.
things. But yes, if the severity of the case goes up, then we need to be that much more cautious, is what I would say, as a very balanced kind of an approach. So there are two extremes for all these situations, and depending on the severity of the matter, I think we need to have the horses for horses, what they say, in English. I think
Yeah,
that
I think,
principle has to
and
be.
we can utilize our own judgment. So,
Absolutely, absolutely.
so if income tax department is asked you something, right, or provident fund authority is asking you
Yeah,
something, you can always discuss with your client and give.
absolutely, absolutely.
But the examples that I was giving was criminal in nature. They are against the nation itself.
Yes, yes,
So obviously nothing comes beyond the nation.
yes,
So,
yes.
that is the differentiation, I would say.
Absolutely. Well answered.
The one other question from Sandeep was that expert may not be certified. Is there a requirement in the standard that the expert has to be certified? I don't think so, but still, Naval.
Let Naval take it. He's the expert here.
So I'm sorry, I'm not very clear about the question.
The question is that we have said on few occasions the expert need not necessarily have relevant certification, but he or she is an expert based on his or her work experience and skills. So does the standard require the expert to necessarily have certification by the expert? I
See,
don't.
I am Satish sir. I'll take the liberty of
Yeah, please,
go,
please.
and then I'll request your comment as well. If you read the standard is principle based, and it says that you have to evaluate the credibility, sufficiency, etc., etc., etc. Now there can be multiple ways to do that. Okay. Now, if tomorrow institute comes out with a guidance note, which is still under making, which mandates having this certificate, then it will become mandatory, because every guidance note is mandatory on the chartered accountant. But as of now, I don't see it as a mandatory thing. But practically, how will let's take an example of a signature expert. If he is not certified, then how will you evaluate that he is a signature expert or not? Then anyone can claim it, right? So practically, I think this situation is not going to come. Maybe if you could share the practical situation or dilemma, then we can actually give some more
Just to generically answer this question, principally, see, like how when a statutory auditor says, no, in CARO, that there is an internal audit system commensurate with the nature and size of the business, etc., blah, blah, blah. Now, if the statutory auditor is asked, is there some 10 questions that has to be answered, yes, no, and is it so he has to ultimately take a judgment. Now, if tomorrow I want a signature expert, and I say that my driver of my car or the driver of the car of the director is an expert in signature this thing, because he knows the difference between the letter A and letter B and letter C. Obviously these things will not stand the test of time. I mean, and we have read in public domain so many cases coming where independent directors are none other than the cooks and the sweepers and the so these things have come out, when it comes out and becomes open, we say, "Arey, yaar, how did this happen?" But these things have practically happened, and there are enough and more cases in the public domain where these have happened. So it is more to do with the judgment. And then when in a good situation and everything is accepted, it is accepted. It's like an insurance, no boss. If you take an insurance of your house and you say you want to invest for the contents of the house, you say that there is 1 crore content, and the insurance company is very happy to to give you a policy. It's when you make a claim, that's when all these things start. Ki, bhai, you show me the invoice, you show me that, you show me this, etc., etc. So it is something akin to that. So it is left to the judgment, because it's very difficult at the standard setting level to understand all the scenarios, all the possibilities where, because for signature, which are the degrees or certificates which are recognized. How can you make a laundry list of that certificate? What are the different services that will probably needed to be called upon for expertise? So it is, I think, pretty naive on anybody's part to make a list and say against that each of those lists, first of all, that list is not comprehensive. Then on each of those items which you have thought is comprehensive and you made a list, all the certifications. And for which country will you do it? So also the important thing was, and one very underlying principle was, that these standards are not being made only with reference to it being used in India. Because ICAI was a pioneer in making these standards, it was felt that we can't give Indian specific examples. We can't say EOW or something. EOW is only in India. So therefore, to my mind and to the little experience that I have with this, there's so much more for me also to know and for every one of us to know. This is the little distinction that will be difficult. And I do not expect, and even if it comes, I'm sure there will be a residuary category which says, and any other such certification. So it is difficult. But you need to prove that the person to whom you have relied on has the necessary credentials to do this kind of work.
There's one more question from Santosh Purohit. Can statutory auditor or regulatory body use this report, and whether in coming years this would be made mandatory considering 100% transaction audit? Now, I will take this in two parts. One is, can the statutory auditor or regulatory body use this report? I would like to say that if a forensic audit is initiated under SEBI for a public listed company now, yes, anyway, you have to report to SEBI that a forensic audit has been initiated, and at the conclusion, a report has to be tabled with the action taken by the management, by the board of directors. And secondly, the statutory auditor has to necessarily, under the Companies Act and under CARO, under CARO, they have to report that a fraud has been identified in the company and the limits have been set. So that is already given there. So this report will necessarily, for the required companies under the statutory audit under CARO or for SEBI for a public listed company, they would be taking cognizance of this report. But I think Naval, you can clarify this. Other regulatory authorities, bodies, they cannot use it. I think it will be used by only for the purpose for which it was conducted.
Yeah, that's why Naval had clearly brought it out that, in terms of engagement, who is actually engaging you?
Yes.
That aspect of it.
Confidentiality will have to be maintained.
Of course, it can't come out in the newspaper. That's true.
Yes, and just to add, if any other regulatory authority wants the copy of your report, then as per the other standards of the ICAI also, you will have to talk to your client and then give it. But you have no choice but to give it. But it's not required on your own, basically.
Yeah, suo moto, not
standard requirement, very clear. You have to define who is the user of this report. In fact, already, all the multinational companies, they are putting in reports, you will not use this so and so without our permission and all that. So that disclaimer has to be added somewhere.
Absolutely.
Would the engagement letter also factor the provisions for police protection or similar security and related costs?
Depends on your client and you.
Yeah, depends.
I think Satish sir, someone asked you this question earlier also, right?
Yes.
In our BVSS program.
Yeah. So actually, in this case, what has to happen is you have to envisage all these costs. And, I remember in that example about what I had said about the, when you start, it's like doing a construction work, If you have to build a bridge across the Hooghly River, or you have to build the Baha'i temple, and I'm drawing a little parallel to my previous employment, or if you have to build the Motera Stadium, now called the Narendra Modi Stadium, how do you envisage? Because it's a stadium which has never ever been built before. It's a capacity of 132,000 people in full capacity. Of course, now the test match is going on with probably half the capacity, or 50,000 if I'm not wrong. But so if something like that has to be done, there are very lot of variables that need to be factored. But because you are an expert on that job, the company has some way of actually estimating it. I don't want to get into L&T domain because that's not what I'm mandated to do now by DIPG. It becomes, you have to find out those costs and factor it somewhere, A simple example, even, when you use a credit card, there's a cost to the establishment, which is, passed on by the credit card company. And the establishment has to factor
that how much of it will come through credit card and how much of it will come to cash, and do his pricing accordingly. Now, no, there is no guidance notes for it. How do you do this? And it again depends on the which industry you are in. A jewelry industry will have a typical payment pattern. Which area you are operating? If you're in Gujarat, probably you will have one different pattern. A few years ago, credit cards were not used in Gujarat at all. I mean, when I first went to Surat about few years ago, but they said the credit cards are not. So each business has its own nuances. Each place has its own nuances. In fact, it's also said that you have to understand the environment in which you are actually operating. And I think these factors will come into play. And as we move into, as and when we move into a higher level of FAI, and as we become more and more experienced, and as we probably run through a series of cases, I think there will be many, many more people who will have answers to these questions, and in a more perfected way. That is what
Yes, and I think there have been around 65 total professionals engaged in formulation of these standards.
Absolutely.
And I think there can be many situations which are not covered. But yes, principally they will be covered somewhere. But exact situations, it will depend.
Absolutely.
I think it has to grow, over a period of time.
Just one last question. When will this be made mandatory by ICAI? I don't think they were
Actually, there is a long process for that as well, because it's even for making it mandatory, there are some other legal issues which are needed to be sorted out, because I mean, it's a little very complex kind of a process. But the thought was that let it at least be issued so that it is recommendatory. People have one benchmark, some minimum levels, and I think it will take time. It's difficult to put a number to that.
And one of the basic things is, before making anything mandatory, you need to know exactly how it gets implemented.
Yeah.
Till the time guidance note is not there, I don't think it will be mandatory.
Yeah, it can't be mandatory.
I agree with you, Naval, but I think what Naval said at the beginning made sense. First is the basic principles are in place, and since it is one of the few professional bodies around the world which has first come out with this standard, so naturally the other bodies which are not chartered accountants will follow to adapt or adopt these parts of this, or maybe the full standards, and with advocacy on the part of ICAI and all the professionals who advocate this, automatically, like the IA, internal auditing standards, this would also become baseline or the basic standards to be adopted by everyone.
Perfect. Wonderful.
I think with that, if you, Satish,
any questions on the YouTube or anything? Otherwise, we can.
No questions on YouTube.
Good. Very good.
Okay. Let me just thank profusely Naval for coming in as a speaker, and for Satish to be with us on the third day. Naval was there with us yesterday also. So I welcome Naval to be with us tomorrow also. Tomorrow there will be session 4, which will be taken by Satish and Anand Jangir. And of course, at the beginning, I had a message from Mrs. Archana Nigam, who was the former CGA of India. She will be coming in and speaking to all of us for the next 10 to 15 minutes, because she is very much interested in these standards, So she noticed all these proceedings and she was very much happy to share some of her thoughts in the area. So I've invited her to maybe speak tomorrow for 10 to 15 minutes. And a big thank you to Naval and Satish. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you as well.
Thank you, Naval. Thank you. Thanks a lot for stepping in. And it was a real value addition, because I do not think I would have done justice to the extent of this level. I am going on record saying this. And Dipji, please don't delete this portion when you upload this in YouTube. Let it be on record that I want to mention this, that Naval, you really did a fantastic job. You are really my heroes, Anand and you, both of you.
I think all the 3-day proceedings, the standards have really been imbibed. I've read the standards before I came into this, meetings, but it's really gone inside, the way it has been spoken, debated, case studies have been brought out, examples have been brought out, it has made it live sort of, you can feel the standards now.
No, even Dipji, even I thought that I have read it and I have, imbibed it. I have sat on so many Mondays and Wednesdays and all that. But every time, not every time, but when some new thoughts which have come out from Anand and from Naval, and I'm talking about Anand also,
Yes.
and Naval also, it brings you more insights, and more you hear it, it's like the Bhagavad Gita, it's like the Quran, like the Bible. The more you read it, the more you understand a different perspective. You hear it from somebody else, you hear something more, you get an even
Yes.
more different perspective.
Absolutely.
I think it is like this because it is absolutely a new creature, or what to call it, a new document. And I think all of us have to sharpen the saw. That's the moot point.
Thank you very much, Naval. Thanks a lot, Satish.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I
Thanks,
also
Naval.
learned a lot today. Thank
Thank
you.
Thanks to all the participants.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. You've been great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I'm leaving the meeting. Yeah. Thank you.